The bargain of a lifetime. Jack Carter had been in bad situations before. Smuggling gone wrong, debt collectors on his trail, even an angry baron whose prized wine he may have relocated to a rival buyer. But nothing quite compared to standing before a towering, four-armed alien warlord who had just given him two options: death or marriage. He sighed, rolling his shoulders as the weight of the ultimatum settled in. So, just to clarify, if I say no, you kill me? High Lord Grothkar of the Zarthun Empire sat upon his ornate, bone-carved throne, his mandibles clicking with amusement. His four piercing yellow eyes studied Jack like a bug beneath a magnifying lens. Yes, human, you have trespassed in our territory, smuggled contraband, and insulted the honor of our people. His deep voice echoed through the throne room, the gathered nobles murmuring in approval. But the Empire is generous. I offer you a way to preserve your miserable life. Jack clenched his jaw. He'd heard about the Zarthun's honor. A warrior species, they were built like tank-sized insects, their culture steeped in ritual combat, bloodlines, and arranged marriages. Their nobility played the galaxy's most brutal political games, using tradition as both weapon and shield. And apparently, Jack had been drafted into one. His gaze drifted to the woman standing beside Grothkar, Vrasha, the High Lord's daughter. By Zarthun standards, she was considered, while unattractive, too smooth-skinned, too little chitin, her mandibles underdeveloped. Her eyes were softer than the sharp, predatory gaze of her people. And worst of all, she was short. Maybe only a foot taller than Jack, instead of the usual 2 or 3. Jack wasn't an expert in alien beauty standards, but he'd seen worse. She wasn't horrifying or anything, just different. He looked back at Grothkar. And what exactly do I get out of this? Grothkar's mandibles twitched. He clearly hadn't expected resistance. You live. Jack let out a slow breath, considering. He could fight. He was scrappy, good in a brawl, but there were 20 heavily armed guards in the room. He could try talking his way out, but the Zarthun weren't exactly known for their patience. Marriage, on the other hand, marriage he could survive. All right, he said, shrugging. Guess I'm getting married. The chamber erupted into gasps and hisses of disbelief. Even Vrasha stiffened, her golden eyes widening. Jack shot her a glance. Was that relief on her face? He couldn't tell. Grothkar, however, looked very smug. That set off Jack's internal alarms, but he didn't have time to worry about it now. The High Lord stood. Then it is decided. You shall be bound by the sacred rites of our people. The ceremony begins immediately. Immediately, Jack blinked. Can I at least get a drink first? No. Jack soon realized that Zarthun weddings were exhausting. First, there was the beast trial, where he had to wrestle a four-legged reptilian nightmare into submission. He barely won by tricking it into biting its own tail. Then came the ritual of endurance, where he was forced to drink a glowing, bubbling sludge that tasted like burnt rubber and motor oil. It burned going down, but somehow he survived. Finally, the vow of binding. Vrasha stood beside him, looking tense as they repeated the alien words spoken by the officiant, a 7-foot elder covered in ceremonial scars. By the will of the stars and the honor of our ancestors, you are bound, the elder intoned. A deep hum resonated through the hall as the bond was sealed. Jack exhaled. Well, that wasn't so bad. And then everything changed. As Vrasha took a step forward, her body began to shift. The chitin patches faded, replaced by smooth, radiant golden skin. Her mandibles retracted, her facial structure refined, and her eyes glowed like twin suns. She grew taller, her previously awkward frame now a vision of strength and grace. The entire room gasped. Even Grothkar looked stunned. Jack took a step back. What the hell just happened? Vrasha looked down at her hands, then at Jack. A slow, knowing smile spread across her now undeniably beautiful face. Ah, she murmured. So the curse was real after all. Jack's stomach dropped. Curse? Grothkar's smugness vanished, replaced by something Jack had never seen from a Zarthun warlord before: panic. And that's when Jack realized he had just stumbled into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The wedding and the warning. For the first time in his life, Jack Carter was speechless. Vrasha, the ugly alien princess he had just married, was no longer ugly. Not even close. Her transformation was impossible to ignore. Gone were the awkward proportions and underdeveloped features that had made her an outcast in Zarthun society. Instead, she stood before him tall, radiant, and powerful, her golden skin shimmering under the ceremonial lights. Jack blinked. So, you want to explain what just happened? Vrasha glanced at her father, High Lord Grothkar, whose once smug expression had turned to barely contain horror. The entire throne room had fallen into stunned silence, the gathered nobles frozen in disbelief. I suspected this might happen, Vrasha said finally, flexing her fingers as if rediscovering her own body. But I wasn't sure until now. Jack crossed his arms. Yeah, you're going to have to be a little more specific. She sighed and turned to face him fully. The House of Zarthun has carried a genetic curse for generations. Our royal bloodline is blessed with strength and intellect, but to prevent shallow suitors and political schemers, an ancient modification was made. Until marriage is sealed, our true form remains obscured. Jack raised an eyebrow. Obscured? You mean everyone thought you were ugly on purpose? She nodded. Yes, and until I was properly wed, I had no way to prove the truth. Jack turned back to Grothkar, who still looked like someone had just slapped him with a fish. A very large fish. And you knew about this? Grothkar's mandibles twitched. His gaze flicked between Vrasha and the assembled nobles, the weight of political catastrophe settling onto his broad shoulders. No, he admitted, his voice strained. I had assumed it was a myth, an excuse to justify my daughter's shortcomings. Vrasha's golden eyes hardened. Shortcomings? Or an excuse to get rid of me? Jack's instincts flared. There it was. This marriage hadn't been a gift of mercy. It had been a trap. Grothkar hadn't expected Jack to go through with the wedding. He had expected him to reject Vrasha publicly, humiliatingly, securing her exile and removing her as an inconvenience. The moment Jack said, "I do," the entire game board had flipped. Now, instead of a disgraced, unwanted daughter, Vrasha was one of the most desirable figures in the empire. Her curse was broken, and her value as a political asset had skyrocketed. Jack glanced at Vrasha, who was still glaring at her father. He could almost see the years of frustration boiling beneath the surface, the weight of being treated as an outcast, of being underestimated and ignored. Now, the people who had dismissed her wanted her back. Yeah, that wasn't going to fly. Jack cleared his throat. So what happens now? Grothkar straightened, regaining some of his composure. Now we must. The High Lord stopped himself. Jack could practically hear the calculations grinding behind those four yellow eyes. If Grothkar admitted his mistake too soon, it would make him look weak before the nobility. But if he stalled too long, the rest of the empire would see Vrasha's transformation and realize they'd been lied to about her all these years. Jack smirked. The bastard was cornered. Now, Grothkar finally said, his voice careful, the marriage must be recognized by the empire. A proper celebration will be held, and you will be formally introduced as my daughter's husband. Jack tilted his head. That almost sounded like a threat. Grothkar's mandibles curled into something resembling a smile. Not a threat, human. Merely an understanding. You may have broken the curse, but that does not mean you belong here. The Empire has standards. Jack heard the unspoken words. You were supposed to be disposable. Vrasha's expression darkened. You mean to present us as a couple to the Empire, then dispose of Jack when it's convenient? Grothkar didn't deny it. Jack let out a slow breath, resisting the urge to curse. He'd walked into some real royal-level nonsense here. But if the High Lord thought he was just going to roll over and let himself get played, no. He turned to Vrasha. So, do you actually want to stay here? Or would you rather take our honeymoon somewhere else? A flicker of something dangerous crossed her face. She was thinking, weighing her options. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. That, she said, sounds like the best idea I've heard all day. Grothkar took a sharp step forward. You wouldn't dare. Vrasha met his gaze without flinching. Would not. Jack's heart pounded. They had an opening. Hrothgar couldn't afford to make a scene here. Not yet. If they played this right, if they moved fast. Jack grinned. All right, princess. Let's get out of here. They turned as one, stepping toward the exit of the great ceremonial hall. The murmurs behind them grew louder, the weight of tradition battling the tension of politics. No one had ever walked away from a royal wedding before. But then again, Jack Carter had never been one for tradition. The betrayal and the escape. Jack knew they had maybe 5 minutes before Hrothgar made his move. As he and Vrasha strode toward the ceremonial hall's exit, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressed down on them. The gathered nobles and warriors whispered in hushed tones, their confusion turning to suspicion. No one had ever walked away from a Zarthun royal wedding. Hrothgar wasn't going to let them leave. Not alive, anyway. Vrasha must have sensed it too. They won't let us go, she murmured, her golden eyes scanning the guards stationed along the walls. Jack smirked. They can try. As if on cue, a deep, resonant chime rang through the chamber, the kind of sound that made a person's bones vibrate. An order. The massive doors at the hall's entrance slammed shut. Jack barely had time to swear before dozens of armed warriors stepped forward, forming a blockade. Their exoskeletal armor gleamed under the hall's pale blue lighting, and the unmistakable hum of plasma spears activating filled the room. Hrothgar's voice boomed from behind them. I cannot allow this dishonor to stand. Jack turned, keeping his stance loose, ready. Dishonor? Funny. I thought I was doing you a favor by taking your disgrace off your hands. Hrothgar's mandibles twitched. You do not understand, human. Now that the curse is broken, my daughter is valuable. She belongs to the Empire. Vrasha let out a sharp laugh, the sound dripping with defiance. I was never yours to command, father. You threw me away until it suited you to reclaim me. Jack's smirk widened. Yet about that. I don't take kindly to being someone's backup plan. Hrothgar raised a hand. The guards stepped forward. Time to move. Jack grabbed Vrasha's hand and yanked her toward the nearest exit, a side passage behind the ceremonial podium. The moment they moved, the guards lunged. Jack ducked under a swinging plasma spear, pivoted, and drove his fist into a warrior's side, right between the chitin plates. The alien grunted in pain, but didn't go down. Vrasha, meanwhile, moved like lightning. Freed from her father's expectations, she fought with a fury Jack hadn't seen before. She twisted around a guard strike, grabbed his arm, and flipped him into 2 others. Jack grinned. Okay, that was impressive. No time for compliments. Vrasha shot back, already moving. Jack snatched a ceremonial plasma blade from a fallen warrior, its curved energy edge hissing as he activated it. He didn't bother trying to match the Zarthun in brute strength. He sidestepped, dodged, and countered, using his human speed and unpredictability to his advantage. Within moments, they reached the passage. Jack slammed his palm against the control panel, forcing the door open just long enough for them to slip through. They ran. The palace corridors were a blur of twisting stone pathways, glowing with the soft bioluminescence of Zarthun architecture. Behind them, the sound of boots and shouted commands echoed closer and closer. Jack glanced at Vrasha. Tell me you have a plan. Vrasha's lips curled into a sharp grin. I do. Do you trust me? Jack huffed. Not sure I have a choice. She suddenly grabbed his wrist and yanked him sideways, through a hidden doorway that had been nearly invisible against the stone wall. They plunged into darkness. For a split second, Jack panicked, until Vrasha's hand found his again, guiding him forward. Where are we? He whispered. A hidden escape route, she murmured. Built into the palace generations ago. My father never told me, but I spent years exploring every inch of this place. He thought I was weak, so he never bothered to stop me. Jack grinned. His mistake. They pushed forward through the narrow passage, emerging onto a high balcony overlooking the palace's landing bay. Below them, rows of starships were docked, warriors moving in disciplined formations. Vrasha pointed to a sleek, black vessel at the far end of the bay. That one. My personal ship. Jack assessed the distance. Not impossible. Then, alarms blared. A voice rang out over the comm system. The human and the traitor must not leave. Secure the landing bay. Jack groaned. Yeah, of course they noticed. Vrasha took a deep breath, then turned to him. Determined. Fierce. Ready. We run, she said simply. Jack grinned. I like the way you think. And then they leaped. They hit the ground running, sprinting toward the ship as the entire landing bay erupted into chaos. Guards rushed to intercept, plasma fire streaking through the air. Jack zigzagged, weaving between cover, returning fire with a stolen blaster. Vrasha moved like a storm. She tore through the warriors in her path, flipping, dodging, using their own weapons against them. They reached the ship. Jack slammed his fist against the control panel. The ramp hissed open. Go! Go! Jack shouted, firing blindly behind them. Vrasha darted inside, heading for the controls. Jack was right behind her, punching the emergency override to seal the hatch. A deep rumble shook the floor beneath them as Vrasha activated the ship's engines. The palace's automated defenses whirred to life, turrets locking onto them. Jack strapped into the co-pilot's seat. Tell me you know how to fly this thing. Vrasha's fingers danced over the controls, her smirk returning. Jack, she said as the ship roared to life, lifting off the platform. She turned to him, golden eyes flashing. I was flying before I could walk. The ship blasted upward, dodging laser fire as they punched through the atmosphere. Jack let out a breathless laugh. Well, that's one way to start a marriage. Vrasha grinned. And we're just getting started. As they jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Empire behind, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A new beginning, a new threat. Jack had always wanted to fly away from his problems. He just never thought he'd do it as a fugitive, alongside an alien princess, while escaping an empire that wanted him dead. As Vrasha's personal starship shot through hyperspace, the interior hummed with the low thrum of the engines. Jack finally let himself breathe. All right, he exhaled, leaning back in the co-pilot's seat. We made it out. Now what? Vrasha sat in the pilot's chair, hands steady on the controls, her golden eyes focused on the swirling blues and whites of hyperspace. Despite the chaos they had just escaped, she looked calm, almost free. Jack wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. We can't stop moving, she said after a moment. Grothkar will send ships after us. He won't let this go. Jack frowned. Right, because now you're what? Too powerful. Vrasha nodded. Now that the curse is broken, I'm not just some overlooked daughter. I'm a true heir, and that means I'm a threat to my father's rule. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Great. So instead of being some disposable husband, I'm married to the biggest target in the Empire. Vrasha smirked. Regrets. He thought about it for a second. Everything had happened so fast. One moment he was trying to talk his way out of a death sentence. The next he was bound to a mysterious, cursed alien woman. And now? He wasn't sure. Not yet, he admitted. But let's see how long we survive before I answer that. Vrasha let out a small laugh. But there was something else in her expression. Oh, wait. Jack caught it immediately. All right, what aren't you telling me? She hesitated. He turned fully toward her, arms crossed. Vrasha, she let out a slow breath. It's not just my father. Jack narrowed his eyes. Go on. She shifted in her seat, hands tightening on the armrests. The Empire isn't stable. My father rules through fear, but he's not the only one with power. The noble houses, the warlords, the military commanders, they've all been waiting for a moment of weakness. Jack sat up straighter. And you just gave them one. Vrasha nodded. By proving the curse was real, I exposed my father as a fool. Half the Empire will see him as weak for believing the lie. The other half will want me on the throne instead. Jack let that sink in. He had just wanted to survive. Instead, he had stumbled into an empire-wide power struggle. Fantastic, he muttered. So what's the plan? We overthrow your father, start a rebellion. Vrasha's lips pressed into a thin line. If I challenge him now, I won't last a week. I need allies. We need to disappear long enough to gather strength. Jack sighed. Disappear, huh? That's going to be tricky considering we just pissed off one of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy. Vrasha's gaze darkened. Not if we go somewhere even he won't follow. Jack raised an eyebrow. And where exactly is that? Vrasha turned back to the controls and adjusted the NAV system. Coordinates flickered onto the display. Jack glanced at them and immediately tensed. No way. He shook his head. That's the drift. Vrasha's voice was steady. Yes. Jack groaned. You do realize people go into the drift and never come back, right? It's a lawless region. Pirates, warlords, rogue AI. Hell, some people say there are things out there that don't even belong in this universe. Vrasha met his gaze, unwavering. That's exactly why we're going there. My father won't risk sending an armada into the drift. The Empire has tried before. They always fail. Jack exhaled slowly. So our brilliant plan is to go somewhere so dangerous that even the people trying to kill us won't follow. Vrasha's lips curled into a smirk. That's the idea. Jack let his head drop back against the seat. He was really doing this. All right, fine, he muttered. Let's go get ourselves killed in the most reckless way possible. Vrasha chuckled, her fingers gliding over the controls as she adjusted their course. You'll fit right in. The ship rumbled slightly as the new trajectory locked in. The gentle swirl of hyperspace flickered, twisted, and then the stars bent around them as they jumped toward the unknown. Jack glanced at Vrasha one more time. The once overlooked daughter of a warlord was now on the run, a rising force in a collapsing empire. And somehow he was at her side. He let out a deep breath, rolling his shoulders. All right, princess, he murmured. Let's see what kind of trouble we can cause. As the ship hurtled toward the drift, Jack had a feeling that whatever awaited them was only the beginning.